getting back to how Mouse ruined comics.
Okay.
All right, 30 seconds. Your 30 seconds are up. No more boomer music.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
Hello. It is Wednesday. It is another episode of the Mattriarchy, and I am, as usual, your host, Matt Rhys, enjoying a mixed beverage today. How is it going, everybody?
Just fine.
It's going.
I have had a horrible, exhausting day and found out that I have a boatload of work to do this month than I had been anticipating. And so I want a short show. So we discussed everybody wants a short show. So hope you guys out there in the world aren't feeling that you're wanting a 3-hour knockdown, drag out conversation about one more day or something, because it's not going to happen. Hello to Philip Cummings. How's it going out there? I
saw Phil was doing Bible reading streams.
Yeah,
That's neat.
he is.
I'm going to give a teeny bit of feedback, but I'm also going to say props to you, Phil, for reading the Bible. I have no criticism of that. The reading's a little bit on the dry side, so that's my only bit of feedback. But
so when you get to the judges, make sure you're doing some good voice acting.
Or you should sing it like a rabbi.
Okay, I'm not saying go that far. I'm just, But I also wanted to give props for doing that, because anyone who reads God's word, like I said, got no criticism on that point.
So how's everybody's week been, other than me complaining and whining about the horrible day I had?
It is. I did. Speaking of like stream, I think this might be why I'm so wiped. I was supposed to do like a review of Lone Star 1 through 3, then it went really well. But suddenly, like the after review part, where we spoke with Mike, dragged on for and it was good stuff, but it went on for like, I feel like an additional 2 hours. So I think that thing was like 3.5 hours long. It was one of the longest review streams I've ever done. I was just dead afterwards.
I have not followed. That one caught my ear, and I wanted to kind of I wanted to check it out, but I have not yet. So maybe I'll have to do that, because I've not read any Lone Star. So was this one on Well Red's channel?
Yeah. No, we me, Matt Krotz was there, Dark Gift Comics, and who was our fourth? Literature Devil, like the guy who has like 100,000 subs.
Literature Devil.
I forgot the guy who has like literally like 6 figures of subs.
He's working on the Yellow Flash book.
Oh, really? He probably said that during the review. It's just there's so much got said that day. Yeah, Mike actually didn't talk NFTs much that time. He talked a whole bunch of stuff. It was neat. He pulled up stuff. He's like, oh, this story. He was just kind of showing us stuff that he'd made. Because Mike really does love comics. He genuinely does. And so he's like, oh, here's a thing I made, and it's probably not going to get published, or it never will be published. I'm just going to show it to you guys. He showed us like a Marvel story, I think he did, that's never going to see the light of day. And I was like, hey, why not? And he's like, because it's not. And I was like, thanks, Mike. That clears it up.
Well, he may not want to explain why, in case doors don't close forever.
I don't know if that was it, or if it's just Mike being Mike. Might have been that.
I'm thinking probably even odds on interactions I've had with Mike. Also, Mike is a guy, like, every once and again, he will like go off on somebody, but he almost always apologizes at some point, and he goes so far out of his way to like keep doors open. Like I can't not respect that, even if I like can't like relate to that at all.
I think the part that I respect about him is the fact that when you genuinely love comics, you're just attracted to people who just talk about them no matter what.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so he's very clearly that guy, because there are people who hang around comics and it's like they're using it for something else. Or they've got another, game they're playing. Speaking of which, let's talk about Isom. Kidding. Actually, I'm here to
that part is.
I'm here to defend Isom, actually, so that's fun.
Unlike what we're talking about today, at least if we were talking about number one, I actually own Lone Star, so I probably would have been able to talk more about that than Isom. I've not seen anything but a few like screenshots from any of them.
I don't know how much I really want to talk about Isom as a whole, but I did want to share one really hilarious story. So I had negative interest in reading this book, and any interest I had in reading the book was sort of killed after my one interaction with Eric July, who I've never met a thinner-skinned, whiny man in my entire life. That being said, and I've met me.
There's a lot of thin-skinned people in comics, so
that
list is going to be
a lot. And once again,
there are people that we know that have thin skin. I'm not going to name names. I'm just saying, like, we know people who are thin-skinned in our scene. That's just me telling it how it is.
And I mean, I think there's something about that in the artist milieu, right? Especially because the idea people tie art into self-expression so much, so that if people are critical of your art, they think you're being critical. They interpret it as being critical of your person.
Yeah.
So.
No, that happens. Like, I remember being part of workshops where we were talking about, just the work, and people would leave crying. Actually, it's funny. I should talk. I take criticism. I'm terrible at taking criticism. So I think
you are one of the people, because I don't think you're terrible at taking criticism. I think it has to be because you and I have had conversations about stuff. But there's a way in which criticism can be told in a way to be heard by the individual, and I think that because of like your personality, demeanor, whatever, and it also reflects in the way you give criticism, right? Because I've never heard you give criticism that is harsher than, well, except maybe with Genie A. That is harsher than the criticism that I've given you, right? It does in that same timber. So, and
that's just because Rhys is a harsh guy.
I am a pretty. Well, I also like being. I mean, I want to be open to being told I'm stupid. So, and I'm very bad at picking up hints. So, I'm a blunt person, and I like people that are blunt to me. So,
Jim Tuner says Eric July voted for and supported Obama. I can't take his politics seriously. He addressed that. I will get. So I'm in the role of Eric July defender today.
So anyhow, I want to get back to my story before I get into that, because that's perfectly fine. But
Jim, just hold on. I'm going to address that.
Okay. Yeah. Any interest that I had in reading Isom, which was slim because he was already trying to price it out of my price range.
It is expensive. I can't defend that.
I am a poor man. I'm not a poor man. I have been in the fairly recent past a poor man, and paying that much for a 22-page book or whatever it was, even if it was 60, is ridiculous. I'm reading comics. I'm not looking.
Isn't it 82? It's like technically 82. Sorry, okay.
It might.
I counted.
Yeah, I don't remember. Whatever it was, it doesn't have 60 pages of content in it. So, but anyway, point being, it was kind of outside my price range. Any curiosity I had was squelched by his personality in interacting with him, and Cartoonicus has got my number right there. It's going to come up. Yeah. But I was curious about what the hype was about. So I listened to you guys stream with Well Read, and when you went through it all, and I kind of felt like I got a feel for what I might have been missing. Right, you talked a little bit about how the story was as much as whatever, and it was like, okay, I definitely, no curiosity about it, whatever. And then a couple of weeks ago, I was on Twitter, and somebody shared a link to a Reddit post. and in this Reddit post, somebody had dissected Isom, whited out all the word balloons, and rewrote a whole different story using the same art. And I read it, and it was not terrible, but it also it wasn't great by any means, but it was like a generic comic at that point. It had been just a generic comic with a fairly boilerplate story arc, and I couldn't imagine how any real story would be different from this. So I had to seek out and read the book just to see what the hell that was about. And the real book, the pastiche, was coherent and directed. The pastiche was not. I mean, the real book was not. And the pastiche made me care about the characters, and the real book did not. And the reactions of people in the pastiche were exaggerated, but in the way that like a Saturday Night Live sketch was. So they were still believable within the sake of the jokes. And in the real book, they were not. And then I started wondering whether Eric July had ever met a human being before. And not really, but it wasn't enjoyable for me to read at all. And I have no interest in seeing where he's taking the story.
Well, I disagree with some of those but there are certain. I mean, I've reviewed Isom, so I've got. Yeah, I can acknowledge the criticism.
My recollection is that you are curious about where it goes.
Yeah, that's mostly
that is one of the big differences.
Yeah, we can get to that in a second because I give a lot because I've read a lot of indie comics at this point from this particular corner, this scene, and I tend to give a lot of latitude, and latitude other people don't give and are not required to give. But I do give a lot of latitude and slack on issue ones in particular. Because to me, everyone, including the pros, like if you watch pilots, like television pilots and things of that nature, a lot of people struggle out of the gate to get a story started. And so to me, I'm like, okay, if by issue 3, that's why I feel more comfortable going, okay, now I have a real sense of where you're at. I can judge it better and be a more comprehensive, I guess, about my judgments.
Mm-hmm. But for $35 a pop.
No, like I said, I can't defend that at all. It's an expensive book. And that's been a big thing that's held me back from wanting to buy a bunch of Isom and such comics, because it's just like they're $35 a comic. Now he's still giving you in terms of page count, it's something like 80 pages, but that's still super expensive for 80 pages. It's a lot, and it's something that we have.
And to me, the crazy thing is that like it's 80 pages. Sure. Okay. I'm not going to argue with it. I swore it was 60, but whatever. And I thought it was stretched out real long for that much too, but a lot of decompression for not even knowing any of the characters and no motivation except for pride. And yeah, it was but anyway, but even with that, I mean, like dude made like 7 figures on that, and not passing the savings on to you. Just like, yeah, if he's moving numbers like that, then he's got that discount for bulk, and he's not cutting you in on it. And that's like, man,
So he's
I
I got something to say about that. Again, I don't know if it actually changes anything in your conclusion, but it just maybe adds a little, I don't know, perspective on it. I do want to go back real fast and answer Jim Tuner's question. So I did watch. Wellred actually got a interview with July, and actually prompted him on not just the comic, but on some of other things regarding Eric's life and development to where he is now. And to be perfectly fair to him, he admitted to the Obama thing, and he was pretty straightforward about his evolution there. And he, according to him, and you can believe him or not, but according to him, his Obama support was back when he was in college, and it was before. He basically said he said, I didn't know anything about politics, and so I was just kind of ignorantly just supporting Obama. He said at college he was challenged by someone who essentially, in his words, knew more than he did, actually knew what he was talking about, and it prompted Eric to essentially educate himself on politics, and that's where essentially that put him on the path to where he is now. And I would say, like, that trajectory makes sense. Like, a lot of people were snowed by Obama, and so he wouldn't be the first.
And college about the time that happens to people when they start getting on that path anyway.
So I will give him, like I said, that much, in the sense that he's like, oh, well, he then started reading, I think it was Thomas Sowell, and some others. And apparently it opened his eyes. And I think I don't know, I'm not an expert on Eric July, but I think he's kind of a traditional libertarian kind of guy now.
He claims to be a anarcho-capitalist, doesn't vote, all that kind of stuff.
Okay. But yeah, so he's not like, I'm not saying he's the most articulately political person, but he's at least read more than many people in college who pretend to know what they're talking about. So sorry, we can move on.
Doesn't take much reading for that.
No, you're right. That's what I'm saying. Like, reading the one book by Thomas Sowell that he mentioned, where puts him ahead of a whole bunch of other people.
And I have to be completely honest, I've only read one Thomas Sowell book. So shame me if you want on that. It'd be fair. But white liberals and black rednecks. Damn.
I think that's the one he read. I think that's the one
good.
the one he read.
It's a good one.
It's still good. Yeah,
but yeah. So on to Isom though. So the thing that is interesting, and this it's weird because there's a lot to there's some nuance, I guess, to it. July put up his money. He front loaded the funding.
As a rich man, that seems appropriate.
I mean, it's still a lot to do. He was still a huge risk on his part. He could have, he fronted, I'm trying to remember how much he fronted. Was it like, I think he fronted, at least 6 figures or something worth of cash to make it.
That's for somebody with July's income. That is not a risk. That's a hobby.
No, it's still a risk. I got to give him that much. It's still a chunk of change, and if you bite that eats into your net worth, and
that's reported on your taxes a profit and loss from business, and it's a zero in here.
It's the type of risk where you don't repeat it, right? Like, that would have been his one jump into comics. If he failed it, he wouldn't have done it again.
Again, I'm not the biggest. I'm not like worshiping rich people. I'm just saying that they are people too, and when they lose money, they still lose money. It's not like there's this temptation for us to be like, oh, you've not lost anything.
Lose money where they don't make payment. That wouldn't lose the money like not making payments on his house and his car and his summer home.
I don't know if he's that rich. I know he's.
Yeah, he went from being a college football star to being an internet star to being an internet star with a network. The man's got fuck you money.
Yeah, he still risked a chunk of it to go and make a comic book with no guarantee of making anything on the back end of it, and he's continued to put. I'm not saying this. Okay, so let me just say this to say that he did all of that, whereas other people ask for the same amount of money or more on crowd funds regularly with no guarantee the product will ever be made. So that's really all I'm trying to add to
Right.
this is the fact that
So
he
everything was paid
front-loaded
for up
it.
front.
Yeah.
And so then that $2 million that that came out of the fans' pockets for a subpar book, and he didn't take any hit. There was like he ended up making more money than he thought he could have.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the risk paid off for him. Like it did. I'm just saying that
it was a proper business investment.
Right.
It's a risky investment, but it's still just a proper business investment. If it didn't pay off, maybe you would be like, okay, well, that was my attempt at comics. I'll go do something else with money now.
I'm just saying for context, people regularly ask for the same amount of money or more for the same amount of page count or less. That's all I'm saying. I'm not really like trying to be, I'm not lionizing because like it's at the end of the day for me, I'm still like, you're still asking me for $30 for a comic book. I have a hard time forking that over. Like that's my position. But I'm saying that if we're going to fully contextualize his book in the sea of everything else that's available,
Well, let me put it this way. I'm in the middle of reading a Blue Beetle trade that I bought at Walmart for $12. That is twice the size, easily twice the size, if not 3 or 4 times the size. That is painfully woke and far better a story.
Yeah, but I do have to say this about with indie comics, you can't use
all
the
that risk. Because here's the thing: if you're saying, "Oh, he took all this risk," yeah, but he wouldn't hire a goddamn editor.
Didn't he get? I had somebody. Was it Chuck Dick?
Yeah.
He consults some people. The problem.
I know Chuck's going to be on the next one.
He consulted Chuck after I one.
Yeah. But I will give him props for the later half of what you said, though, because at least he fulfilled a book, which is not something you always see here. So I definitely agree with that.
He pre-fulfilled it. It was ready to go before he sold it.
Well, I mean, the art was ready to go. It wasn't printed yet, but
it was okay.
Because he still ended up being 4 months after his promise date.
That's
2 months, 4 months, something like that.
That puts him ahead of like most people who crowdfund. Most people who crowdfund do not deliver exactly on. Like, this is just these are the mechanics of indie comics. Which, if I can just add,
I usually give about 6 months. I think is like the grace period.
Yeah.
So by other metrics, he was like a miracle worker. But the main thing I want to say is that we can't use the exact same metrics that the mainstream industry has in terms of distribution and shipping. They have access to things we don't. They have access to things we don't have. They can charge. They can eat costs we don't have. That's partly why the Blue Beetle trade is longer and is cheaper. So some of that is just mechanics of indie. Indie comics often have been more expensive, and it's easier for mass media entertainment to
$10 a piece.
That still doesn't
delivered early every time.
That's the maybe an exception that like helps prove the rule here. For most indie books, they're
right.
expensive.
I mean, I'm saying that. I'm just saying.
All right, like it's not even entirely fair there because Tim has lower overhead. Like he's able to do a lot of it himself. Like that plays a role.
Except that Tim can't print them himself. Right, and all of the art and writing was done before the campaign went live, so that overhead time is already all paid for.
I'm just saying for context. What July's offering is really not. It's basically par for the course. So if there are problems with it, the problems are beyond him. I know it's weird to call indies an industry, but I think
it's at least a double bogey. I'm just going to go with that.
I think there are things that impact, and again, there are problems I sometimes have. One of my biggest problems with our indie scene is how expensive it can be, but some of that is just these are problems that impact everybody, and if we're going to solve them, we have to solve them for everybody. So many of us are in this boat in terms of dealing with that particular issues with how expensive and how long it takes to get indie books.
Because that's one of the things that, you take a look at the way you do it, right? No, I'm serious. You pay for the art up front.
Uh-huh.
You sell on the back end.
I make nothing.
What?
I make absolutely nothing.
And make nothing. Well, you also aren't, an NCAA star who, levers his fame into internet fame, which levers his fame into network fame. Yeah. You got to remember, Eric July started up here. He
did. That's
right.
Yeah.
And he's got multiple audiences, even as a music audience too. Like he's dipping in so many different
and all of his advertising was free. So on Glenn Beck's program, which millions of people tune into every day. So who didn't even know comics still existed anymore?
Yeah.
so yeah. You've got to. So I mean, but in that, like when you factor the fame out of the equation, and you factor the capital investment out of the equation, you're already doing what he did right, that you have capable of. You have the front loaded, and the only hangups you have with getting your book to people is whatever's going on with the printer at the time, because you're moving 1 to 12 books at a time, not several thousand.
Yeah, I don't have a warehouse. One day we'll get there.
You don't have
I don't have the warehouse.
Jim Tudor says, I didn't know Glenn Becky still existed.
Glenn Beck died the minute he stuck his face in Cheetos. That's when he stopped existing in my mind. Glenn Beck was done. He stuck his face in a Cheeto bowl, and I was like, all right, you no longer exist. I'm not exaggerating. That happened. That's the real thing that occurred.
Okay. Dude's an entertainer. I wouldn't be surprised.
But anyway, I'm just riffing off what Jim said. All right, so back to Isom though. So
back to Isom. Like I said, I felt it was listless, that it was directionless, that it was non sequitorious.
Wait, is that even a?
I don't know. I don't know how you make an adjective out of non sequitur. I tried.
English language. We can throw anything onto any root word.
I tried really hard. It may have been a fail, but I tried.
It's clever. I like it. We'll go with it. It's fine. So we addressed the elephant in the room of the production aspect of it, which, like I said, I think is a bit of a mixed bag depending on stuff.
The fact that the dude, and here's part of the thing is, and I totally believe this is true. The people that are passionate about Isom tend to not be people that are passionate about comics in general, right? There are probably some crossover, but I doubt the crossover is significantly huge. But the fact that he's able to mobilize a customer base, that's impressive.
Sure,
that's impressive. I don't understand how so many people and this is one thing, like you were saying, you're curious enough to check out issue 2. I can understand where that's in there. I mean, why?
Well, like I said before, part of it is that I'm until I get to issue 2 or 3, I don't even feel equipped to judge even issue 1. I have to have 2 or 3 in front of me before I can even judge issue 1. So I judge issue 1 to the best of my ability, but I have to be at issue 3 before I can really comprehensively have an opinion. I can get that with a 20-page floppy. Yeah.
But I don't understand how with an 80-page book.
No, that showed up in my review.
I remember, but yet you still are like, I think I need 120 pages to know how I really feel.
I got that with Lone Star, by the way. I got about 150. I was finally able to go. Here's where I'm at with it. But
I haven't read any Lone Star, but really quick, thumbs up, thumbs down after 150 pages.
Oh, I'm mixed on it.
Okay, that's fine. That's fair.
I am thumbs up on Lone Star as a character. I am on the story.
Yeah, I like Lone Star as a character.
Yeah, Lone Star is a cool character. I want to see Mike use him again. The story Mike told was a bit of a thumbs downish. It was a bit dull.
Yeah, it was pretty bland.
Are you thinking that Mike needs a writer?
Mike, the writer, you mean?
Maybe Mike needs a writer.
Mike, it's such a. I'll say this very briefly, and then we got to jump back to Isom.
Yeah,
What's weird about Mike? Mike has extremely solid fundamentals, whether it's art or writing. So he knows, like skeleton wise, he's like, here's where you put your A plot, here's what you put your B plot, here's what you pay your T's, here's where you put your payoff. So he knows like all of the mechanics. And he's very solid on all those points. He chose the most boring, bland story to then apply those mechanics to.
By the way, Fizz, if we didn't say hey earlier, hello.
I think one of the big problems too is comparing the writing to the art. He is technically phenomenal in many ways. He doesn't know how to break the rules when he should.
Yeah,
And that's something I've felt about his work for a long time.
I said in my review that he needs to take more risks because there's a certain safety he's being. Yeah, so we're actually on a similar wavelength there. Yeah. And that goes with his art design on the antagonist. The Soviet vampire is really blandly designed. It's like you could have done so much better with this.
Yeah. I think we probably feel mostly the same way about it.
All right, back to Isom.
Damn it, Cartoonicus.
Oh, jeez.
Everyone's favorite character is Strong Bad. Not even like that show.
Strong is the best. There's no argument. Ravens. Gotta say hi to Nick real fast. Hey,
yeah, hello to Nick real fast. Absolutely.
Wave his Nick before he passes.
But yeah, like I said, I mean, like one of the things I was talking to somebody in Evie's Discord. I had just finished it, and I needed to vent at somebody, about Isom because I was just so.
Did you pay full price?
Equivalent to underwhelmed, right? It's like the most painfully banal thing I'd ever read. Anyway, and one of the things that this person pointed out, because they really enjoyed the thing, and what they enjoyed about it was the world building in Isom. And I have to say, I actually do agree. The texture of the world in the story is far more interesting than anything happening in the story and anyone making things happen in the story.
You're hitting a very important nail that we hit in our review, which is the fact that because he's got pilot episode 1 syndrome, and because he's approaching this, I think, like very much as a new creator does. And in my opinion, one of the pitfalls of a new creator often is to do too much world building, to overcook your world building and to go, look at my amazing world. And then someone says, hello, excuse me. The story you told here is really kind of boring. And I don't have the story Bible in front of me like you do. I'm not as invested in that story like you are. And you did not do your job adequately to communicate your passion through a convincing story. You just communicated a skeleton of a world building that you will eventually build a story on top of. And so I think that's a very new creator type of mistake, which is Eric is a new creator. So part of it is like, well, he made the new creator mistake. And I'm like, yes, he did. So yeah.
And that's an interesting aspect too. And something I have wondered about my own stuff. Right. Because when we put together all of our stuff, we have this super complex world that we've barely even touched any of our stories, other than mentioning things because we figured that things would just leak out as they leak out. We don't necessarily need to, but I don't know that I really pulled it off. So that's something I've always wondered especially in the first few issues of Forces, if it flows without being hung up on the whole timeline of things.
I mean, I think I'd have to go back and reread it again. I think that all of us end up running into those same issues. I think the degree that we stumble into that is shows where we're at in our writing journey. My first comic book script was, I'm glad I didn't produce it because it had all of those mistakes and more, I think. And I think it's something that you do because if you think about it, a lot of us who get into writing, we start by writing a type of fan fiction.
Yeah.
You start by taking someone else's story and we go, well, here's my version with my character I made up who fights Superman or is Superman's best friend, or Sonic the Hedgehog fan comic, whatever. And we make a lot of the mistakes as we go doing that. And if you think about like Roy Thomas and the people who did Alter Ego and such, I think that's kind of where they cut some of their teeth as well. And so it's a very common thing to go through. It's part of the growing pains of, I think, becoming a writer of these types of things.
And
You start, go ahead.
one of my thoughts on that always had been too that like when it comes to the deep lore, like you don't really need it for the most part when you're getting into something.
Mm-hmm.
You just need to you walk into the world and kind of experience the lore as it goes, right? So like when Lord of the Rings was first going to come out, right? I heard about it. I wanted to read this for years. I'd never done it before. I sat down with a copy of Lord of the Rings. I opened it up concerning hobbits, and I was so confused. I put the thing on the shelf and waited and saw the movies, right? Then after that first movie or so came out, I went back and I read The Hobbit. And The Hobbit doesn't explain anything about the world of The Hobbit, right?
No, it's great.
It just plunges you into this world and you experience it as it goes, right?
Yeah.
And so you learn the rules of the world as it goes. And then you put aside The Hobbit and you start reading concerning hobbits, and suddenly everything makes sense. And as you get into the meat of Lord of the Rings, everything makes sense because you've already been introduced to this world in a way that just like you would, like you were growing up as a kid. You know, I know when I was an example, when my children were small, they used to not understand that Cheyenne wasn't in Nebraska because we live in Nebraska and we drive into Cheyenne and, you know, they don't see a border. So they just thought that Wyoming was another part of Nebraska. And then we said, no, we live in Wyoming. And so was Wyoming in Nebraska? Like Scottsbluff is in Scottsbluff County? Like, no. But it's just part of the world. You know, you learn a little bit as it goes. And so that I guess that's one of those things. And so one of the crazy things about the Reddit version of ISOM is that it does the same amount of world building in like an intro page, and then tells a story with the rest of the panels. So yeah, if you haven't, it's crazy.
Yeah, so my main criticism about July's positioning, because he accomplished something very significant, we can't deny it. He in a comic book, he came out as a completely unknown creator, an unknown entity, and made more money than like anyone ever did in our scene. Just about, he's in the top 10 in terms of like what he did. He was the top 2, top 3. He's way up there.
Yeah.
And the fact that he did that without like any credits to his name.
He had credits. He had a decade of credits.
Not in comics.
It doesn't matter.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Without the ability to walk into comics without any credits in comics and then do better than anyone else it's significant. I'm not saying it's significantly. I'm just saying it is significant. It merits being noted. But the thing
is, he didn't walk into comics. He used YouTube to sell comics. That's different. He wasn't selling to an established marketed to an established comics base.
You get what I'm trying to say here.
I do.
He came to comics, and that's what I'm saying. I'm just trying to. The point I'm actually trying to make is the fact that okay, that is worthy of note. It is a noteworthy thing what he represents there. However, the thing that I have an issue with, and this is the thing that I think is actually the most dangerous part and the most dangerous threat to July and ISOM moving forward, is he is, from what I could tell, and this is I saw some things about the San Diego Comic-Con that kind of backed this up, but he seems to be positioning himself after his initial one-issue success as sort of like, well, I'm going to teach you guys how to do comics now. And that's my problem. And the reason why it's a problem is, aside from it being kind of like a bit of hubris there, but aside from that, my concern in terms of being genuinely concerned about his craft is if you make a average book, which in my opinion, from issue 1, without
less
judging,
than,
I put it at average-ish.
You need to read better books, man.
It's average. It's average. You have to understand the bar for the mainstream has been lowered so far. It's been lowered so far.
History still exists, though.
But
I mean, this one here, that still exists.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm just saying. All right, so here's my problem. Here's the thing. Here's the concern that Eric should have too. Okay, if you make an average product and you get overly praised for it, and you get overly successful for it, what incentive do you have to listen to criticism to actually genuinely, objectively improve? So what I'm afraid of is that Eric July will very naturally listen to the monetary success, and then also naturally listen to the yes men who just glow with not just praise for what he has accomplished, but overpraise the work. Because it is the people who do glow about this, I do think they are overrating it. And I think that could cause huge problems for future books. Because if you want him to get, as you want all creators to get better, we're not really incentivized. I don't think, what incentive does he have to improve? And that, I think, is the real problem with the whole scene surrounding ISOM. So that's a concession, and something that I think is naturally is regardless how you feel about it, I think that's a problem that he should concern himself with.
Well, and I mean, I think Captain Cummings has pointed to a very interesting. You become Rob Liefeld.
I like Rob.
I know, and Rob gets unfair criticisms in some ways, but the fact that 17-year-old Rob Liefeld was making six figures, drawing, did definitely, and he even talks about how it warped his perspective for a while, and he had to find the sense in himself to listen to good so I think there's definitely some argument to be made that Rob went through a phase where he was responding to the dollars and the yes men, and not necessarily improving his craft completely. And it's also worth remembering how fast he was having to output because he was so desired. That's a thing too.
So that's where I sit on ISOM. Is like I'm like, it's average. And I am being generous because, like I said, I don't have 3 issues. I also tend to be more generous to indie books in general. I have personal reasons for that. There's also, I think, there's also a defense of that because of what indie represents. So I am probably being more generous. I acknowledge that. I do acknowledge many criticisms of the work, but I would much rather be generous to an indie book, even if it doesn't deserve it, than be generous to a corporate book, even if it does deserve it.
Well, I think there's something to be said for that. Mike Nelson of Mystery Science Theater was once asked, "What is the worst movie ever made?" And he said, without missing a beat, Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. And the person who's interviewing him says, "You've seen thousands of horrible movies. How can Attack of the Clones be the worst movie ever made?" And Mike says, anybody can make a bad movie, but not everybody can make a bad movie for $500,000 or $500 million or whatever the cost was for the thing.
Right, yeah.
He said, you can hire the absolute best of everyone and you still made a bad movie. Not a mediocre movie, but a bad movie. You're trying at that point. And that's where I come down on the July thing, right? July, spent so much of his time building YouTube fame around discussing the cultural and artistic merits of comics, and he didn't spend a red cent making sure his own work wasn't terrible. I mean, that's
that's good. I don't think anything.
Drama teacher would have been a better story editor than he had in that one. There's so nothing that happens in the story, and no motivations for anyone to do anything. The only motivation.
That's fine. All right, that's going a little too far. I think you're.
The only motivation that is clearly stated in the story is ISOM is mad that he was disrespected, not that people are being victimized, Not that, whatever. He spends all of his time bitching and moaning about being called back into action, and then the only reason he's involved or invested is because somebody called him a name.
There's a sister he's concerned about. That's there.
He's not concerned about his sister because his sister isn't involved. His sister.
He is concerned about her. He's following up on her.
The sister is a catalyst for him to get told about it, but she's not involved. It's the person working for his sister whose daughter is involved.
He has a family investment in the things that are going on. That's his through line to the event.
He's guilt tripped by his sister into doing something and not being a useless piece of crap. That's not a good motivation that I can appeal to.
If in issue 2, I had similar. I didn't push as hard as you on this. I did notice these issues. And that's also why I think I kind of was like, all right, in issue 2, I definitely want to see more. Because it's fine for a character on his arc to be kind of crappy if it's part of his arc to become a better person.
You're right.
So if he's not caring enough about his family, which I think I had some issues. I think I pointed out I think he could care more. He's caring more about his own ego than he's caring about his family.
Or the people
but
that
if
work
that
for
ends
him,
up right. But if that's part of his character arc, I'm like, okay, that's fine. So that's why I'm like, I have to see issue 2 because it's like, do you pay off on that? Do you address that? Because that would be, to me, the thing where I would judge that either more harshly or less. I swear, if Jim, if you mention blankets again, I'm timing you out.
This isn't Jim. This is Cartoonicus.
No, Jim's the one who's triggering me with blankets talk.
Let's talk blankets contrasted to Isom. Ooh, that's actually really appealing.
No, I'm done. I'm never talking about blankets again. They are
very nearly the same story.
What?
I don't know that that's true. I'd have to spend some time thinking about it. I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case, but I really have to dissect it, and I just don't want to. I got other crap going on in my life.
I think I've tapped out at the 6-hour mark talking about blankets. I just can't do it anymore.
Yeah, we've talked a lot.
I can't do
Plus,
it
you've talked about it in school. I know we've talked about that. So,
Captain Cummy's trolling us there. Our chat's trolling us.
Segue to one more day. Blankets triggered Twitless must be part of the hot part of the country. That's actually true. You are from a hot part of the country. I mean, you are right now.
Yeah. I'm currently sweating it up. Yeah.
It was warm in Nebraska today as well.
Yeah.
We finally got cool nights again, though. We for a while a couple weeks ago, our nights weren't getting lower than like 78. That's ridiculous. But currently, we're down in the 60s, so I'm pretty happy about that. Can actually cool the house down at night. So,
yeah. Well, let's get off from talking about this fascinating topic of the weather and get back to talking about ice.
Well, old men sit and talk about the weather. That's how it goes. I've heard it on a couple of country songs at least.
I refuse to be that old today.
But you came on the wrong show. So
okay, so right. So here before you say more negative things about ISM, say something positive.
Say something positive.
Say something nice about it. Like your most positive.
I already mentioned the only good thing about it was that the world was interesting.
What about the artwork? There's some positive
parts of the artwork are good. Parts of the artwork are really subpar.
Well, hit the positives. I want to hear the positives first.
That's the thing though. There weren't enough. The parts that were good were mediocre, average, what you'd expect from a superhero comic.
Do your best.
And
what is the most
bad?
Positive?
Looked like something I drew.
Wait, what did you?
and so I can't say anything. I mean, the coloring was good throughout. So Gabe still has his stuff.
Yeah, coloring was a little bland here and there, but that's
but I mean, it was solid. None of the in places the coloring matched the story.
Yeah, it's also set in Texas, which means that you're going to get that's part of the color palette.
Yeah. Yep.
So it's not like set in Metropolis.
So I tell you, to be honest, I really wish that the story would have just followed what was going on at the ranch instead of what was happening in town, because that seemed a lot more interesting.
I also set my story in Texas, but I prefer brighter colors.
Parts of Texas are really bright too. Texas is.
We're also not that far from each other, too. Like, I'm probably like 25 miles from Eric.
Yeah.
I am going to give some praise to the to some of the artwork, and specifically the final action scene had a couple of pretty cool pages and moments. Some very dramatic. I think it was one of the money shots of the two, like the main antagonist, the mini boss essentially that he fights. And there's a couple.
The guy who doesn't know him at all, and the whole fight's supposed to mean something. Yeah. Yeah, that was awesome.
I'm talking about the artwork when they're leaping at each other is a good. It sticks in my mind. I still remember it. So obviously,
I don't.
There was something about it that now I have criticisms of that fight scene. I'm just saying
I think I only remember the page before that was all over Twitter when people were trying to figure out what the hell they were talking about and why.
When they're leaping at each other, it's a fairly good shot.
Okay. I'll take your word for it.
It's like I said, I think it works for it. My issue with it, which would have made the fight scene better, is the fact, and this is something that's not just. Oh, hold on.
Ed Ming is calling me out here. A Nebraskan complains about the weather. It's about as common as Dan slotting a Big Mac. Ooh. Can we name some shots? I just had a Manhattan. It's 2 shots of whiskey and an ounce of vermouth garnished with a cherry.
I think he's get some shots. So you need to actually bring them all the way over to him.
Oh, can we get some shots? No, I can't. I don't have the right licensure to transport liquor across state lines, and you live a really far way away from me. Hey. You know what, though, Cartoonicus? If you really want to, if you happen to make it down on the 23rd of September, we're hosting a mini-con here in Scottsbluff, and you're welcome to come on down. And if you feel like it, then we can have some drinks on me.
Sorry, I'm back.
Oh, you mean from the comic? I don't have it with me.
If you give me a second, I might be able to pull one. What I wanted to say is the thing that I wanted to criticize the fight scene at the end, and the one, but this is not just an Eric July problem.
I've missed you, Ed Ming. Where have you been? Your content's amazing.
You're just saying that because he gives me crap.
No, it's because it's funny. That's legitimately funny, dude.
You're right.
You notice how he was just giving me crap? I laughed at that too. I appreciate it.
That's fair.
I like being kept in my spot.
All right, I'm gonna see if I can find something ISOM related, artwork wise.
I don't have any ISOM art, but I can show you some Terrible Forces art if you're interested.
Give me a second.
I've got some good stuff that's dropping on Friday. This is H Got Me page. I got it all colored. It's ready to be loaded on Friday, so I'm very happy about that. But I'm also working on some reformatting some old stuff of Chris and mine from way back in the day, and so I'm relettering and changing things around.
So I have to be very. We got to be careful what we share ISOM wise because
the trolls.
One of the things. Well, it wasn't just that. Eric can come after if you're not careful. I don't have
included him in the trolls.
Oh, okay. Let me see if I got it in my. I do have something I can pull up in just a minute. But I will only share a couple of images because Eric's kind of sensitive about that. He needs to loosen up a little bit on that. But there was, to his credit, and to be fair to him, there was a malicious poster who posted the entire book and was kind of steering people towards a pirate copy. And if you do that, then on your own head be it. So if you're pulling that garbage, piss off. But he sometimes
maybe I've just been giving away comics long enough that I'm immune to that kind of thing.
If somebody is deliberately pirating and steering other people, I'm like, I got no defense for that.
I get what you're saying there. That's guy may be a douche, but I don't have to live my life upset just because there's douches out there in the world. I might anyway, but I don't have to.
so alrighty, showing thing. Yeah, so I'll try to show that image of one of the good pieces of art, and then I'll probably show one that is very commonly shown. I'll show images that are very commonly shown, so I'm not really going to spoil anything significant. I don't think. Here we go. And it's basically just like essentially a screenshot of a couple pieces. Let's see here. And also, to be fair to Eric, whether he invites it or not, he also gets targeted by bad actors at times who deliberately do try, because like the whole Dick Masterson veto nonsense, some of that has been targeted. People
I don't even know what that is.
Who have like tried to
I'm
start
familiar with it.
Lawsuit garbage. You know the you've heard about the whole deal where someone pretended to be a journalist and then pretended to start trademark disputes with a church over the name Isom. Oh, you've not heard this? Yeah, it's a whole thing.
I
can talk about it in a minute. Oh, well, it's made the rounds a bit. I'll talk about it in a second.
If you watched the Vomitorium, you would have heard about this.
Sorry. Maybe I should. Call me a bad person. It's probably true.
You're bad. You're very bad. All right, so I've got a page to share. This is I think this is one of the better pieces, and I've got praise to say about it. Let me zoom in a bit, and I also have a criticism. So I've got both to add to this. So I like this shot. I think it's dramatic. I think there's some for a first time creator making a superhero book. This looks like something that would show up in a mainstream comic. This
isn't a first time creator doing this. The artist has done stuff before, hasn't he?
Well, I'm talking about Ripa specifically. Like if we're going off of Ripa's scripting.
Sorry. Yeah.
So here's the praise I'll make is I was like, ooh, this looks like anything. Like I said, if I picked this, if I saw this in a Marvel book, I wouldn't bat an eye. So like the fact that Ripa is able to have a scenes like this that look just as at the quality of mainstream, that again is a noteworthy thing to mention. However,
he's read a comic and has money. Excellent.
Never change, Rhys.
Am I wrong? Aren't those the qualifications for having this scene in a book?
Here's my criticism. Because I want to be invested in this scene. Something is holding me back. And it is a lesson that the mainstream industry has forgotten. So it's not just Eric July and his team's problem. It is a problem with the entire mainstream of comics. And I brought this up in my review. Ethan even Skyver even commented on it. But comics allow us to do something that very few mediums allow us to do, and very few mediums choose to do, which is to allow us interiority. By that, I mean, there's a reason why Claremont's X-Men and an old school Spider-Man were so beloved. And it wasn't just the humanity of it. It's the fact that young boys love to armchair quarterback. And by that, I mean that when we were camped out in Nightcrawler's head, he didn't just teleport. Every teleport he made, Chris Claremont would have often have a little thought balloon where Nightcrawler basically calculated what he could do and what he couldn't do with his teleporting. When he fights Wendigo, he can't teleport around because it's dark, and he might teleport into a tree, and the mechanics of that might get him killed. And so actually, although you'd think he could easily escape, that little thought balloon adds tension to the scene. When Spider-Man is fighting, his dialogue, which you can hear, would often say something obnoxious and snarky to Scorpion or Dr. Octopus, but internally there'd often be a thought balloon or a dialogue box, whatever you want to put in there. But we'd get to see Spider-Man's thoughts, and he was often calculating how much danger he was in. So on the one hand, you'd get the charm and the obnoxious sarcasm, and on the other hand, he'd be like, oh my gosh, if I get hit again by that tentacle, it's going to crush my jaw and I'm going to be in trouble. What this allows you to do, and what allows young men to do, is to get into the mechanics and get into the theory crafting and do the armchair quarterback of how they would maybe react in the same situation.
Well, and it's not
something
just,
okay.
It's not just young men either. You look at romance comics or Archie comics, and they use the same dynamic in other areas of peril. Right?
I would argue that it's something that appeals very much to young men, and let me add why. The reason why manga has been making such inroads is the fact that action manga, especially, will pause a fight and have the characters either internally or externally talk about their powers and the moves they can do.
Yeah.
And young men love that. Young men love to be like, this guy can do this, and this guy can.
In terms of action, absolutely.
Yeah.
But in a romance book, where the girl is, giving, the boy just total grief about it, and then she thinks, oh, I wish I could tell him how I really felt about him, but everyone would laugh at me. You have that same type of dynamic.
Interiority. Yeah.
In a different type of peril.
Right. So what I wanted to focus about on this, what we see before us, though, is how it applies to action and young men, because manga has done the one thing I'm going to give manga very heavily here, because I don't want to just get into the manga's better. Manga has learned a lesson that we have forgotten. It's a lesson we could relearn. And the lesson is that when we look at these 2 pages, the artwork looks really dynamic and even is inspired a bit by manga. If you look at the action lines, but what we don't have is what is going on with any of these characters internally and what moves they're thinking, what calculations they're making. And if we did have it, this is me saying, if I had, we don't have to go as far as Claremont. Claremont actually went too far sometimes. But if we had a little bit more than what we've got, what we could do is we could see what's going on in one or more of their heads. Are they tired? Is one of them feeling like he's stronger than the other? Is one of them more confident? And this would allow us to get more invested in the action and also getting more invested in the character and the scene. And it is a consequence of what I call the cinematic turn, I guess post 2000s or something. And it's when comics decided to become little movies on paper. It was a huge mistake. And we need to go back. And it's not just Eric July's fault. It's Eric July is just taking up the pen of what a lot of people do. And it is a huge, huge misstep. We got to go back.
Want something funny about that?
Yeah.
The Reddit remix of Isom uses thought balloons and captions in this scene to talk about why he's going to win this time and he didn't last time.
Oh, that would help. That'd help.
And that's like what, like, I already felt like, I mean, like that the story is so much similar as far as the overall arcs of the story, but all of the beats drive home better in the pastiche than they do in the original. And it is a little more boilerplate as far as those things go.
Sure.
But the story isn't, Swamp Thing or anything anyway, right? So
sure. So that's what I wanted to say. I wanted to praise the artwork. This is a dramatic moment, but I'm missing some of the drama that I should get. And it's something, and I hope it's a piece of criticism that July does listen to on some level, because I'm afraid that unfortunately a lot of people are probably hyping up the cinematic aspects of this, and it is a mistake. And I think it actually takes away from what comics are. Because if you look at this is how it would play out if it were on TV. Yeah. The problem is that on TV, we would actually get more frames. And because we get more frames on television, the frames on TV could actually tell us, without that interiority, a little bit more of how the fight's going, maybe what the characters are somewhat thinking, because we could see facial expressions more often.
Yeah, you can see the raise the eyebrow and and things like that that are micro expressions.
Right. That would say, oh, maybe this character is tiring out or something.
Mm-hmm.
In order to do that on comics, you would have to give way more pages and frames to this scene, which you don't necessarily need to do. Instead,
the thought balloon.
Right. That's the point. That's why. But this happened in Lone Star too. Mike S. Miller, I think, ran into this issue as well. So it's not only Eric July running into this issue. It's something as I'm working my way through Omega Girl again. It's something that I have to remind myself. Oh wait, there's this huge tool that's been in comics since like day one that I can remember that is part of the medium.
It's funny. I don't even think about it. I just kind of do it naturally for humor's sake.
I think
I do a lot of interiority. One of my favorite things to do is I like to put cartoons in people's thought balloons so that you can actually kind of see how they think of other people, because it kind of gives like more characterization that way.
Yeah, Game Boy occasionally thinks in memes and things like that. That's something we've worked into his stories. But and I'm a big fan of people talking to themselves, thinking out loud. So there's in fact, I'm going to look up a particular page where I'm very proud of this page, because I tried doing that exact thing in a story. So let me think here, find it. It's great radio. Listen to me go hum-a-da 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 hum. And
you actually do kind of get that in like TV and film sometimes, but ever since we dropped the narrator, which it still occasionally shows up in film, but it's not as popular as it used to be. Goodfellas has a lot of interiority since he's telling a story and he gets to actually comment over the things that happened as they're happening in front of you. Most of the time it's only used for comedy, like Saved by the Bell. You'll actually have Zach times out and he'll tell you like his thoughts in the moment and then time goes back in. And there's like ways of doing it, but comics kind of let you do that without stalling what's going on, which is kind of cool.
Anime does it all the time too. Like they'll have the characters like, and it's become kind of just part of the tropes where the characters just kind of
I think it's because it's in the manga, right? So they're just trying to adapt what they see in the manga.
Yeah. Come on, Death Note. It's all over there in Death Note.
Yeah. Well, I was just saying, like even in stuff like Bleach like in Bleach, like they'll have characters like awkwardly pause a fight and then talk for 10 minutes about how their powers work. But the point I wanted to make about that is the fact that we still accept that because we want to we want to armchair quarterback. We are fine with the characters awkwardly pausing a fight scene. And this is not, I'm not just talking out of my butt here. An entire genres of manga exist on these tropes of stopping fight scenes so the characters can explain how their powers are working and what they'll even say, here's what I'm going to do next. And we're totally fine with it.
Silver Age books were full of that kind of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'll use my
battle
blast.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's pretty much the whole battle shonen is that, right?
Yeah. So I'm saying is that, the reason why the cinematic choice is like, well, people wouldn't do that in real life. So the attempt at verisimilitude that we see in film and what has happened post, again, those 2000s has trickled into comics and made it so that we rarely do those things anymore. And we just show, well, this is how it would play out on film. And that makes comics the bastard child of film, makes them less than film as opposed to more than film. And like I said, I think it is a contributing factor to why comics are continuing to lose ground because they're trying to ape the style of a medium that they are less than and also greater than at the same time.
Well, that was like another problem I had with those pages that we were looking at, because that was the first time I saw those pages. I've seen some shots and stuff, but I haven't read the whole book. But they seem kind of dull, not just because they were lacking like interiority, like thought balloons or anything, or even like screaming. Like if they were just going all out and yelling, that would probably even add more to the page because you understand what type of headspace they're in. They're in too much of a heated moment to think, which people get into. But it was also like the panels weren't really playing off of each other, right? You just have this one big splash shot, which is fine, but then this other page does look like it's just some snippets of cinematic shots. And another cool thing about comics is that like the whole page can play with itself.
Yep. Yeah. That's the other side of it is that the more cinematic you lean, the less your layouts will play to the strengths of the medium as well, because your layouts will simply be, oh, this is just another film shot. And you won't think about the fact that the page can become poetry or metaphor, which is something that Mike S. Miller does extremely well in Lone Star. He can make the page sing when he at certain points. It's beautiful.
Well, I think Jim Tuner's pointing out the thing is the transition of comics into storyboards.
Yeah.
And that's been something that people have been talking about and praising for a couple of decades, with the idea that, oh, the comics are so easy to adapt because there are pre-made storyboards, which just makes me want to smack people in the face, because it's so much more than that.
I'm fine with some stories doing that. Like, I'm not going to lie. Like, it's okay for some stories, but I think the fact that it is becoming so endemic that it's impacting all comics, it feels like. And it is, I think that's where I'm like, we're going to lose. I think Western comics in particular are losing a vocabulary that they developed. And it's like, and so they're becoming essentially less literate. And, and they're, as a consequence, they're becoming lesser films, because they have way fewer frames. The whole big difference between comics and film is comics have, like, you know, a minuscule fraction of the frames.
Well,
but
I mean, there are more differences than that, but that is a difference.
It's one of the central ones. The fact that comics exist in both time and space, as opposed to just time, which is what you have with the chronological presentation of images in film.
Well, I think that last statement that you made, which I totally agree with, I think it's you missed the point by explaining it as comics have fewer frames than movies, because it's not just the fewer frames, sure, but it's the layout of the frames. It's the size of them all.
That's a subservient point to my broader one.
Right. Yeah.
The subservient point is the fact that comics do have fewer frames, and so because of that, and because of the strength they have, because of the presentation of frames, they need to, in order to make themselves stand apart, be artistic with the representation of frames, because you have fewer of them, but conversely, you have the benefit of being able to do more with those frames. Film has different strengths. So if comics just copy film, they will always lose. That's the point. That's my broader point. Comics stop copying film. Instead, learn a couple lessons from film. Like, even Eisner talked about, I think, the fact you can learn lessons from film. But play to your strengths in your medium, in your lane, and don't just try to be the lesser art form of something you can't fully realize.
So should we drop the discussion of frames altogether and just call them panels? Come on. They're panels, which I think actually makes more sense anyway, because it ties them to the art world more than the cinema world, which I think there is a lot more in the language of comics, in the way it actually functions on the brain, is more in line with fine art and illustration than it is with the way film works, because of the fact that
well, because even frame comes from the art world, right? Because, like, the idea of what's in the camera frame comes from what fits in frame, because you're going to paint slightly outside your canvas, because some of it's going to be covered by the frame when you finally put the picture up. Like, all of this comes from the art realm, like, originally.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe I'm grasping. It's possible I'm grasping.
There's overlap, I think, with all three, and I think that's what makes comics really great. I just think that lately they have, because comic book film has been so profitable as film, people looked backwards and said, how can we translate this into the comics? And then it was
and the crazy thing to me about that is you go all the way back to the first, the first super successful comic book films were in the 40s with the serials, but you make that more, even into the 60s TV series adaptation, 60s and 70s TV series adaptations, and the Superman the movie and all that kind of stuff.
Ran 78, yeah.
Right, 78. You're looking at, you still had comics operating as comics during that whole time, and they were still super influential and into super successful, rapidly successful, film and television projects, without having to understand, without having to change or lose the language of comics. So the fact that now we're looking at the hyperinflation of current mundane numbers, and we're like, you know, and then suddenly we've forgotten the lessons of the past. I don't know. I just it boggles me that you know, people can be so short-sighted, and how editors in mainstream comics will just, you know, they just get super thirsty for that Hollywood cred when Hollywood's coming to you for the ideas.
Well,
there's making, you know?
there's an explanation that is sadder, but it also is less deliberate. And it's something I realized when I was making my first comic book script, which was you tend to create that which you immerse yourself in. So if you immerse yourself in a lot of comics, you'll start to really see. This is something I've noticed: the more I read comics, the more I can see, and the more I am tempted to emulate what I surround myself with. And the more I see, like I said, Micah Miller had an amazing, genius, perfect page layout that harkened back to, you know, the lessons from Kirby and Steranko and so on. It's in Lone Star 1. It's gorgeous. And the more you surround yourself with that, the more you're going to create that. However, conversely, the more that you just watch TV, the more you're going to be tempted to think in terms of television and therefore write television. And I submit that the sadder but also somewhat less deliberate side of this is that a lot of, I think, writers of comics are simply TV watchers now. And so they're not reading a lot of comics. They're watching a ton of television. And I know this partly because my first comic script was informed by this. I just took a couple of television shows I'd watched. I put some superheroes on it. And when I went back and looked at it, it was like, this is just paced and essentially designed around what I would just see on TV. And it's something that can very passively creep up on you if you're not careful. I think that what we're seeing is, some of it may be deliberate, but I think some of it is, how much time are these creators just simply sitting, turning on Disney Plus, watching a bunch of TV shows, and then they go and script a comic, and that's what their brain defaults to.
Well, that is an amazing place to end. We didn't have a whole lot planned for today. I just kind of wanted to get some of my thoughts about Isom out, and I knew we could have a good conversation about that. But that's a really great place to end there, guys.
Am I crazy? That feels pretty okay, right?
No,
I mostly agree.
Yeah.
Especially if you're not vigilant about it. Like I definitely mostly agree with that.
I mean, and because, like, you know, you go, if you I don't know if you guys listen to Chuck Dixon's shows, right? And that dude's, you know, cut his teeth on comics, but he loves film. But he talks about the differences constantly about what you can do in a movie and what you can do in film, what you can do in a novel, and what you can do in a movie, and what you can do on comics, what you can do in a novel, and what you can do in comics, and how the thought processes are different. So you can tell that that's a dude who takes the time to think about the storytelling languages he's working in, right? And how what he consumes informs those, but he's being very intentional about how he's thinking about it all. And so when you say that, I'm like, that has the absolute ring of truth. It makes all of the sense to think about it in that term. And thinking about, you know, conversations I've had with people on this show through the years, and I think that you're definitely onto something. And I've even, I like, one of the things that I've talked about in the past, and we hinted about it today, but when I've talked about comics with people in classes or whatever, that movies allow you to see things in motion and in ways where, so you get to see people's expressions in motion. I talked about, we talked about micro expressions, right? Where we little twinges of the lip, little eye things, and you get so much of our emotional learning is from these nonverbal communication skills, right? Little flare of the nostril, that kind of stuff. And that stuff you can't necessarily emulate in comics in real time. But you can get deeper than that, because you can actually read what Iceman thinks deep in his heart. And so you know which chicks he thinks are cute. And to which he will give the cold shoulder. And so where
I got you. Cold shoulder. I got it. I got the joke. I got the dad joke there. Ha ha ha.
So you get to experience that internality as in every aspect of a comic. and that's a tool that hasn't been being used. And a lot of people have talked about the death of the thought balloon and how that's led to a decrease in the way captions are great if you only have a single narrator. Well, the beauty of comics is you can have 2 or 3 narrators of what's going on at any time because of thought balloons. And so there's been a lot of ink spilled over the loss of thought balloons. But I think that's all part of that thing, because film doesn't have thought balloons. And even if it has narrative, it typically only has one person who gets to be the narrator, even in a movie.
Yeah, or if you're Deadpool with captions, you can have 2 or 3 different people thinking inside the same head.
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about Deadpool, but
Me neither.
so, but yeah. So I think you're definitely onto something, that we have that we're having a group of comic writers who are not listening to the final words of advice in every episode of the Mattriarchy to get out there and read some comics.
Yep.
Yeah. So there you go. That's the story. That's the show, guys. Get out there, read some comics, especially if you are in the process of making comics. But even if you're just a reader, the more you read, the more you'll keep in pace with the language of comics, because it is something that it's a part of us, but it is also something that we can forget about. So yeah, that's the show, guys. Thanks for tuning in. We went long. Sorry, Twitless.
That's okay. All good.
So
It was a good conversation.
I think it was good. It was good. I think next week we are doing Superman 4, right?
The Quest for Peace.
I think that's the plan. We could do a watch party, but I don't want to bother with that. That takes a lot of learning that I ain't got.
We would get so struck so fast.
We couldn't do it on YouTube, but we could do it out there in the world somewhere.
Yeah, we could do like we did when Marm, I, and a couple other people did a commentary track for The Hobbit, right? Like we basically had a track where everybody was watching it at the same time, or like we all had our version up, and then we were just talking into it, and other people could put it on, and there would be the timestamp would be on screen. You know, like that the timestamp was being captured the whole time.
Gotcha.
There you go. That might be fun someday, but not today. So we're going to call it. Yep. Later, everybody out there in the world, and keep reading comics.